Hey everyone, welcome to episode 339 of the All Dolphins podcast. As we get down to it, preseason finale scheduled for Friday night at Raymond James Stadium, where the Dolphins will take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the final audition for the roster hopefuls to make their case, and for those who may be secure in their roster spot but are looking for a bigger role on the team also to make their case. We're going to dive into all of that today on this episode 339. If I were to dedicate this episode to a player who wore jersey 39, as we once did as part of our history lesson, that of course would be Larry Zonka, whose jersey is retired, one of three players whose jersey has been retired by the Dolphins, along with Bob Greasy, his number 12, and Dan Marino, his number 13. But we're talking here about the 2024 Miami Dolphins, who conducted a joint practice with or against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Wednesday. Never know how quite to define it because they're practicing in conjunction with, but against, because there's head-to-head competition. So I always say with, because it's not a game, it's not necessarily a competition and not keeping score. Regardless. So what we're going to do today is we're going to examine the Dolphins roster by position because the roster cuts are coming, or I should say the final roster moves to 53 because not all of them will be roster cuts. There could be some players placed on IR. There could be some players moved from active PUP to reserve PUP, such as Isaiah Wynn, Bradley Chubb, possibly Odell Beckham Jr. as well, along with the player transactions to get down to 53 by 4 p.m. Eastern time. And as I mentioned earlier, Friday night is the last chance for those on the roster bubble to make a final argument with their play to the Dolphin coaches. And along with discussing what the roster projection looks like at this particular time, we'll also discuss a little bit what we saw at the joint practice with Tampa Bay, keeping in mind again that this is a collaborative effort among all the writers who were on hand, because it is impossible to see everything that goes on one field, let alone two, which is what the teams do when they conduct joint practices. I had my eyeballs on the Dolphin defense, same as I did when they practice with / against the Washington Commanders. And overall, I would say it was probably a decent performance by the Dolphins. They gave up a couple of long balls, including one where Ethan Bonner had really good coverage against wide receiver Ryan Miller, but was beaten on the play. It's not one of those where it's troublesome that he got beat deep. Again, the coverage wasn't terrible. It's a good play by the offense. And sometimes you just have to tip your hat to the opponents because, as somebody famous once said, or somebody maybe not famous, the other guys get paid too. So anyway, so we'll start with the quarterback situation. The Dolphins currently have three on the roster: Tua Tagovailoa, Mike White, Skylar Thompson. The practice didn't start off well with Tua, who threw a pick early on a ball that hung a little bit too long, intended for Braxton Berrios. However, he did rebound from that throw and had himself a good, solid practice with a couple of really, really nice throws, including one where he threaded the needle to Jonnu Smith, a good sideline completion to Braxton Berrios as well. Nothing overly shining in terms of Mike White or Skylar Thompson. And very important to note, the practice ended with each team getting two cracks at a 2-point conversion with a different unit each. And the second quarterback for the Dolphins after Tua was Skylar Thompson. And that kind of continued a pattern we have seen throughout the summer of Skylar Thompson getting the work immediately after Tua. If you notice the two preseason games against Atlanta and against Washington, Skylar got the start against Atlanta when Tua was held out, and against Washington when Tua started, it was Skylar who came in first. Now, the official depth chart lists Mike White as second team behind Tua. Also understand that official depth chart, again, and actually I should say that the one that's released, that the Dolphins have to release per NFL rules, if and it's not just the Dolphins, if teams didn't have to release a depth chart, they wouldn't do it. They have to do it for television purposes and game coverage purposes. So take the depth chart more with a grain of salt than what our eyeballs are seeing us, and what the eyeballs are telling us based on that is that maybe Skylar Thompson's running ahead of Mike White. Having said that, also remember Mike McDaniel's comments, which he has said maybe 3 times during the week, that what he's wanted to do with the backup quarterbacks all summer is put them in difficult situations to see how they handle those, because by nature, the position of the backup quarterback is you're going to come into a situation that's generally not favorable, particularly if you're called on mid-game. And then as far as Mike White is concerned, if we're going to relate to that, let's not forget this is a guy, again, neither Skylar Thompson nor Mike White has looked particularly impressive all summer. But in the case of Mike White in particular, for example, he's come in basically with a 13-team offensive line with 3 wide receivers who were not with the team when July arrived. And then he finished the game against Washington with a wide receiver playing running back. That would be Jaquan Burton, because the Dolphins dressed 3 of their 6 running backs in the game, and Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane had been deemed done for the game. Back quickly to the joint practice. I mentioned the 2-point conversions. On the first attempt, Tua threw a quick pass to Devon Achane to the side. Achane waltzed into the end zone, touchdown Dolphin. On the second throw, Skylar Thompson threw a fade, and we love those. Intended for tight end Jody Fortson Jr. It was batted away. Didn't really have a chance to get completed. Good PBU by the defensive back. So the Dolphins won 1 for 2. Defensively, on the first play with Baker Mayfield at quarterback for the Bucs, Calais Campbell batted down a pass at the line of scrimmage. On the second play, it wasn't a fade per se, but eventually the backup quarterback, Kyle Trask, did try to go to the corner of the end zone. Nick Needham in good coverage. Passing complete. I do know that all the Dolphin beat writers who were watching the play at the time kind of made the comment that had that been a game situation, very well might have been a flag. Now, note that there were officials at the joint practice. They didn't throw a flag. Incomplete pass. Dolphins won that particular segment, and that set off a celebration. So where we stand heading into the preseason finale as far as the roster projection at quarterback, well, obviously Tua's making the team, duh. Now the big question is that Mike White's going to be the number 2 quarterback. Is Skylar Thompson going to be the number 2 quarterback? And here's where I'm going to throw another wrench into the equation, another curveball perhaps. And as a quick note, I have my 53-man roster projection 4.0, because these change because of injuries and because of other circumstances on a frequent basis. I may do one before Tuesday arrives after the game against Tampa Bay, after we see what goes down. But I have one right now on Miami Dolphins on SI, MiamiDolphinsOnSI.com, where every day there's 5, 6, 7, 8 stories depending on what's happening. And I certainly encourage you to check out the website on a regular basis. In fact, bookmark it, por favor. So this is where I stand right now. I don't think there's a major differentiation between White and Thompson for the number 2 spot. I have maintained all along, I think the trust factor would be higher in Mike White, understanding both have been in the system. Skylar for 3 years. This is his 3rd year. Mike White for 2 years. Mike White has more game experience in the NFL. And I just think that Skylar Thompson might have more athletic ability than Skylar does. I think in terms of decision-making and managing the game, I think Mike White would be the choice. And if I were to guess, I think Mike White would be the option at the number 2 quarterback. However, the Dolphins, I think, do see an upside in Skylar Thompson. I don't think that they're ready necessarily to give up on him as a potential, really solid number 2 if they go Mike White this year, which is why at this moment I'd be inclined to think the Dolphins very well could keep 3 quarterbacks on that 53-man roster, even with a new rule that no longer dictates that the player is going to serve as the emergency 3rd quarterback has to be on the active roster. Now he can be on the practice squad, but for the Dolphins to put Skylar Thompson on the practice squad, if that's a decision they make as Mike White for the number 2, They would have to waive Skylar Thompson, and then he would have to clear waivers before he could be re-signed to the practice squad. And I don't know that it's a lock that he would clear waivers. I don't know. And again, I've bounced back and forth on this, but the state of quarterback in the NFL is such that it may not be a risk to take, even though I certainly wouldn't. To me, it's not a lock that he would get picked up. I'd be inclined to think he would not get picked up, but again, is this a chance the Dolphins want to take? Running backs, the Dolphins currently have, and this includes fullback Alec Ingold, currently have 8 on the roster: Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Jalen Wright, Chris Brooks, Jeff Wilson Jr., Zavon Horvath, and Anthony McFarland Jr., along with Alec Ingold. Horvath and McFarland were signed this week basically to get the Dolphins through this game and not have to use guys they don't want to use for this preseason finale, such as Mostert, Achane, Jalen Wright. Probably he may be 50-50 to play. He was in a red jersey earlier this week at practice. Looked like he practiced without limitation against the Buccaneers on Wednesday. Chris Brooks didn't work. And this is one where I have a tough time with the final spot. Mostert, Achane, Jalen Wright, Alec Ingold. I mean, solid. They'll make the roster. It comes down to the Dolphins keeping a fourth halfback, which I believe they will do. Comes down to Chris Brooks or Jeff Wilson Jr. And here's the thing. I do think the Dolphins can get something in terms of draft pick compensation if they were willing to trade Jeff Wilson Jr. And then the other factor involved may be that Chris Brooks can help a lot more on special teams than Wilson. And therefore, this is why I'm leaning toward Wilson getting the last nod, with the expectation that the Dolphins will be making phone calls about trading Jeff Wilson. And no, I don't think you can get a good, solid offensive lineman in a trade for Jeff Wilson. What you can get for him is a 5th-round pick, a 6th-round pick, something of that nature. Okay, now we get to the wide receiver position, where it's now become very clear as far as I'm concerned. On the 53 are Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Braxton Berrios, Odell Beckham Jr., Malik Washington, Eric Ezukama, Jaquan Burton, Anthony Schwartz, Braylon Sanders, Mike Harley Jr., Kyrick McGowan, River Craycraft, and newcomer Jadon Janke, another one who was signed basically to carry the Dolphins through the games with all the injuries they have at wide receiver. And if it wasn't bad enough, heading into this week, now we got Tyreek Hill dealing with the thumb issue, which Mike McDaniel has said is not significant. And then Eric Ezukama left practice early with Tampa Bay with what appeared to be a lower leg issue, certainly hoping it's not anything serious. And there's not major competition at that position. And I think the notion that the Dolphins are loaded at wide receiver also is really not based in reality, if we're going to be honest about it right now. Hill's going to make the 53, obviously. Waddle's going to make the 53. Braxton Berrios is going to make the 53. Malik Washington is going to make the 53. Eric Ezukama, unless his injury is major and he has to go on IR, will make the 53. And Odell Beckham Jr. will make the 53 unless he has to start the season on reserve PUP. And again, for those not familiar with the rules, right now, Bradley Chubb, Isaiah Wynn, and Cameron Good are on active PUP. They count against the 90-man roster. They can be activated at any time. They can clear a physical and get cleared to practice. Come Tuesday, however, they no longer can stay on active PUP. They'll have to go either to reserve PUP, which would sideline them for the first 4 weeks of the regular season. They get moved to the active roster. Of course, they could get waived. They could get put on IR. Any one of those. Beckham, we just don't know. We don't know the extent of his injury. All we know is he hasn't practiced since signing with the Dolphins, and that was in early May. And Mike McDaniel is always talking like this is an issue of wanting to make sure that when he does start practicing, there's no setbacks. But again, if it was something minor, certainly would be safe to suggest, man, it's taking a long time for something that's supposedly minor. So I think at this point he's probably 50-50. And I would say here, if he does wind up starting the season on PUP, I think the Dolphins would go with 5 wide receivers as opposed to tacking on a 5th just for another 6th for the sake of doing that. River Craycraft will start the season on IR. I would be inclined to believe. Now, the Dolphins could designate him to go to IR on Tuesday. Remember, they have 2 such moves if they want to. Or they could carry him on the initial 53, wait until Wednesday, then put him on IR. But then when you do that, if they keep him on the initial 53, that means somebody somewhere else has to go. So, and the Dolphins, like every team in the NFL, per new rule, have 2 spots so that they can use in the moves to 53 on a guy immediately on IR designated to return. So I would think that's where they would go with Craycraft, who's somebody who Mike McDaniel really likes and who's somebody who has done some really good work in training camp. Tight end, very interesting position. There are 6 on the roster: Durham Smythe, Julian Hill, Jonnu Smith, Hayden Rucci, Jody Fortson, Tanner Connor. We can tell you Tanner Connor was back at practice with the Bucs. Jonnu Smith had another good practice. He's really come on lately, and very intrigued to see what's going to happen with him. I'm going to maintain that that's your 3rd wide receiver, your 3rd receiving option, more so than any wide receiver on the roster, and perhaps even including Odell Beckham Jr. when he does return. Smythe, Hill, and Jonnu Smith are on the 53. Question is, will the Dolphins keep 3 or 4 tight ends? If they keep 4, I think Jody Fortson's out regardless. Hayden Rucci has had his moments, and he's a good blocker. That's going to gain him favor with Mike McDaniel and the coaching staff. Tanner Connor brings a interesting, intriguing receiving element. At this point, I'm inclined to believe that the fate of Connor as being the 4th tight end on the 53-man roster comes down to whether OBJ starts the season on the active roster or on PUP, because if the Dolphins carry 6 wide receivers to start off, along with 3 quarterbacks, there's a position somewhere else on the roster that has to give up a spot. I think it's tight end, partly because the Dolphins, in this particular case, probably could get 2 of 3, Rucci, Fortson, Connor, on the practice squad after they clear waivers, if they decide to go that route. So, but this is kind of a tough spot. I think Connor has a shot. It wouldn't shock me if Rucci wound up making the 53, but again, we are projecting. My projection right now is they'll go 3 unless Beckham starts on reserve PUP, in which case they tack on a 4th, and I would think it would be Tanner Connor. Offense and linemen, if my math is correct, I count 15 on the roster. Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson, Liam Eichenberg, Robert Jones, Patrick Paul, Aaron Brewer, Kendall Lamb, Jack Driscoll, Lester Cotton, Andrew Meyer, Matthew Jones, Ryan Hayes, Baron Matos, and Isaiah Wynn. And this to me right now looks like an absolute slam dunk, really easy selection to make. There'll be 9 on the active roster: Armstead, Jackson, Eichenberg, Jones, Patrick Paul, Brewer, Lamb, Driscoll, Cotton. Based on the preseason games, your starting 5 right now is Armstead. From left to right, Armstead, Robert Jones, Liam Eichenberg for the time being until Aaron Brewer comes back, Lester Cotton at right guard, Austin Jackson at right tackle. When Aaron Brewer comes back, then you could have Liam Eichenberg move back to right guard. Perhaps Jack Driscoll could get into competition based on what Mike McDaniel said before practice on Wednesday, when he suggested that not everything is etched in stone in terms of the starting 5. Patrick Paul obviously is going to make the 53, and Kendall Lamb's going to make the 53. I still think Kendall Lamb is going to be the first tackle off the bench if need be. And Isaiah Wynn, more than likely, barring something really drastic happening, is going to start the season on PUP if he doesn't wind up being put on IR. I mean, this is a guy, again, hasn't practiced at all in 2024 since he sustained that quad injury in week 7 last year against the Eagles. And obviously this was a significant injury. So, but not a whole lot of mystery here. Baron Matos is going to spend the entire year on the practice squad because he's exempt as part of the international pathway player program. He's the Dominican big guy. So he doesn't count against the limit of 16 players on the practice squad. And I think there's something there to work with. How long it takes him to develop into an NFL caliber offensive lineman, if it ever happens, who knows? We turn over to the defense, the edge defenders. I have 9 on the roster: Jalen Phillips, Emmanuel Ogbah, Chop Robinson, Mohamed Kamara, Quentin Bell, Cameron Good, Bradley Chubb, Wyatt Ray, and David Aneni. The last 2 were signed within the past couple of weeks. The 2 before that, Good and Chubb, remain on PUP. It is my very strong sense that Good and Chubb will begin the regular season on PUP, which will sideline them for each of the first 4 games. And I think the other 5 are pretty solid: Phillips, Ogbah, Robinson, Kamara, and Bell. Bell will contribute on special teams. I don't know that I necessarily would expect a ton of snaps for him on defense, despite all the accolades and what a great training camp story he was for a bit. He has kind of been very quiet the past couple of weeks. It was the same in the joint practice against Tampa Bay. He wasn't terribly noticeable. Chop Robinson had a couple of noticeable plays. He had the one-on-ones which we chronicled with Tristan Wirfs in that interaction there. Interesting. Chop Robinson still, and this is something Dolphin fans are going to have to accept, at times will overrun running plays in the quest to get to the quarterback, where he will rush upfield very quickly off a snap and the offense will run in the hole he just vacated. That's something Dolphin coaches are going to be on him constantly. And if it becomes a point where it gets exploited by opposing offenses, it may at some point curtail his playing time a little bit. Kamara's a little bit in the same boat, but he does not have the same explosion off the line of scrimmage that Robinson has. In terms of what we saw in that joint practice, there wasn't a ton that was terribly noticeable. Actually, Wyatt Ray had a really good play. Jalen Phillips did not participate in the joint practice. He was there, but didn't work. Can't say I noticed anything that really stood out from either Ogbah or Kamara or Bell. Interior defensive line on the roster, I currently have 3, 6, 11. Zach Sealer, Benito Jones, Deshaun Hand, Calais Campbell, Brandon Peely, Isaiah Mack, Leonard Payne, Jonathan Harris, Neville Gallimore, and Robert Cooper. So make it 10. And here's the thing, if we're going to be honest at that position, Sealer, Campbell obviously are the 2 standouts. Deshaun Hand has done a lot of really good things in training camp. I think he's very solid. This is a guy whose entire NFL career has been that when he's been healthy and been able to be in the lineup, he's a productive player. And I think he's a productive player. Dolphins don't have a lot of established nose tackles on this roster. And if we're going to use the Baltimore defense as a model, they had a couple of big space heaters in the middle of that defensive line with Trevor Jones and Michael Pierce. The 2 guys who were closest to that for the Dolphins would be Benito Jones and Brandon Peely. Does that give him a spot on the roster? Oh, they have also Robert Cooper, but he's a late acquisition to camp. I don't think he makes the roster. I think Peely and Benito Jones very well could make the roster, again, to give the Dolphins a couple of big but wide bodies in the middle of the defensive line when you want to go with that formation. Having said that, Leonard Payne's a guy, he's a rookie free agent from Louisville who was flashed the entire summer. He's a guy, to me, if he doesn't make the 53, will be on the practice squad. Neville Gallimore's missed some time, but also there's something there. I think he can be a contributor. Could he sneak onto the 53? Absolutely. Jonathan Harris, Isaiah Mack, they're not that far off either. There's not a whole lot of separation. Again, you get past Campbell and Sealer, who clearly are the main guys. There's not a whole lot of separation, and if it played out a whole lot differently beyond those guys, wouldn't surprise me. For now, I think I'd go Sealer, Benito Jones, Campbell, Deshaun Hannon, Brandon Peely. Inside linebackers or off-the-ball linebacker, however we want to call it, Jordan Brooks, David Long Jr., Duke Riley, Channing Tindall, Curtis Bolton, Anthony Walker Jr., and Daquan Jackson are your 7 on the roster. Logically, you keep 4 at that position, maybe 5, although that one might be a little bit of a stretch. Daquan Jackson was picked up this week, again, to get through the game. Jordan Brooks, David Long Jr., obviously going to be on the roster. Duke Riley is going to be on the roster. Curtis Bolton has been really good, and it was interesting because I reached out to somebody in Las Vegas after the Dolphins signed him, and I was told he kind of a meh player, but I've been very, very impressed with what he's done. I just don't see a path for him on the roster. Could he wind up on the practice squad? Absolutely, but the dude has been very good in practice. The key question now here becomes Channing Tindall, Anthony Walker, both, neither. Well, Dolphins have to keep at least 4 inside linebackers, so one of those 2 would be on it. Right now, I have Channing Tindall making it. Why? Because he has shown some things on defense at times, and more importantly, he could be a core special teams player. Anthony Walker Jr., unfortunately, came with the Dolphins after a couple of years where he really battled injuries, and he hasn't been on the field. Can't remember the last time he's been on the field. He was really, really good in the offseason, but he's just been dealing with something. We don't know exactly what it is. All we know is it's kept him from practicing. And then at some point, I think that may cost him a roster spot. If he were to make the 53, no, I would not be surprised in the least. DBs. Okay, this is going to be the toughest position for me by far. And I included DBs, didn't separate cornerbacks and safeties because there's some versatility there where some certain guys can play both spots. Nick Needham, Elijah Campbell certainly come to mind there. So the list of DBs: Jalen Ramsey, Kader Kohu, Ethan Bonner, Kendall Fuller, Saron Neal, Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer, Marcus May, Elijah Campbell, Storm Duck, Isaiah Johnson, Jason Maitre, Nick Needham, Jordan Colbert, Mark Perry, Patrick McMorris, Cam Smith. Quite the list. Okay, we're going to start with the givens. Jalen Ramsey, Kader Kohu, Kendall Fuller, Saron Neal, because of special teams, Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer. I think Elijah Campbell's also an absolute lock. So the bubble guys: Ethan Bonner, Marcus May, Storm, the 3 rookie free agent cornerbacks who I like all equally: Storm Duck, Isaiah Johnson, Jason Maitre, Nick Needham, Mark Perry, rookie free agent from TCU, who's made a lot of plays lately, had a pick 6 in the practice with Tampa Bay. I will say, and we'll put another quick note on the joint practice. Let's hope the Dolphins don't have to put David Long Jr. in coverage too often. Now, drill as my, here we go, we're back. There's a one-on-one drill as, and those they're going up against tight ends and running backs, always favors the offense. Always, always, always. Having said that, did not look good in coverage in the least. Back to my DBs, and then there's a Cam Smith issue. I think Cam Smith's going to wind up starting the season on IR based on the fact he's dealing again with a hamstring injury and Mike McDaniel's comments of he's week to week. They're not cutting him. He's a 2023 second-round pick. Dolphins are not going to give up on him that quickly, even though he had the forgettable rookie season. He had made some plays after coming back to practice after missing some time. Now he's sidelined again. But still, I think the Dolphins are going to want to see what they can get out of his potential before they would move on, so that's not happening. So Nick Needham is the big name here in terms of who could be on the outs. Marcus May also, but I think Marcus May has done enough good things, and he's a veteran safety. I think he makes the 53. I certainly would not call him a lock. I do think one of the rookie free agent cornerbacks is going to make it with Cam Smith starting on IR. And you could almost flip a coin between Storm Duck, Isaiah Johnson, Jason Mitchell. All three of them have been really, really good. Johnson's got the great size. I mean, Duck's pretty sticky in coverage. Maitre's been the same way, and he stuck his nose in there and run support. I would have no issue with any of them making the roster. Pat McMorris had shown some good things. He's another one who sustained an injury in the joint practice against Tampa Bay. Don't know exactly how serious it is. But there will be this again. This is the toughest position for me to cut at this particular time. So my main takeaway here, I have Nick Needham on the outside looking in. Sorry, Nick. And I have one of the three rookie free agent cornerbacks making the 53 with the other two easily on the practice squad if they don't get claimed off waivers. And then we get to the specialists, and that's very easy. And thank you, Dolphins, for making it easy. Blake Ferguson, Jake Bailey, Jason Sanders. Arguments certainly could be made that the Dolphins maybe should have brought in competition either for Sanders or Bailey. But they chose not to go there. How much is Bailey's holding factoring into his job security? Again, remember, this is a guy whose numbers were okay last year, not great. And then the Dolphins re-signed him as a free agent, didn't bring in competition. And so obviously, clearly, here's their guy. Made it simple as far as that's concerned. So that's my 53. If I went too fast, and if you want to see it in writing, again, Miami Dolphins on SI, where you will get all of our content, Miami Dolphins on SI.com. A whole bunch of stories every single day. I hope you bookmark that page. I hope you liked this particular episode. Please like, subscribe, share. Thanks for watching. I will have a live after the game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, immediately after it ends, and after I compile my instant takeaways and publish them on Miami Dolphins on SI. So hope to see everyone here after the game against the Buccaneers, the preseason finale. Until then, thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.